Today, I want to talk about knowledge questions, understanding them, analyzing them, and extracting knowledge questions from your real life situations in TOK. So, our objectives, like I said, are to understand the differences between first and second order claims and questions, and to practice writing second order questions, also known as knowledge questions. First, let's talk about knowledge claims. There are two different types of knowledge claims. The first type is a claim about the world, and that's the kind of claim that you're typically used to exploring in most of your classes. But the second type is a claim about knowledge, and that is what theory of knowledge focuses on. So, an example of a claim about the world might be hydrogen is the lightest chemical element. An example about a claim about knowledge is the knowledge that hydrogen is the lightest chemical element is quite secure because the methods of chemistry give us a fairly good model of what chemical elements look like. The second claim is about the reliability of the methods of chemistry itself, not about hydrogen. It is therefore a claim about knowledge, or a second order knowledge claim. TOK is interested in the second order, not the first order type of claim in question. So why is it helpful to know about claims in TOK? Well, knowledge questions come from real life situations. When crafting a knowledge question, it can be helpful to begin with a claim about the subject and then think about how to craft a claim about knowledge itself based on that initial claim. Once you have a knowledge claim, you can rephrase it as a question to formulate a knowledge question. This is just one way to approach the crafting of knowledge questions, the extracting of knowledge questions from your real life situations. It is by no means the only way, but I want to give you at least one way to do this. So let's look at knowledge claims again. In TOK, there are two types of knowledge claims. And as I said, the first kind of knowledge claim is a claim about the world, and it is the job of TOK to examine the basis for these first order claims. That, if you examine the basis, the underlying or implied ideas about knowledge that are assumed based on the premises of those claims, then you are going to be able to extract or bring out some of the claims about knowledge that are implied by those first order or claims about the world. So claims that are made about knowledge itself are the second order claims made in TOK, and those are justified using the tools of TOK, which usually involve an examination of the nature of knowledge. So based on that, just think to yourself now, which type of claim do you generally make in your classes or daily lives? Probably you make most of the time you spend making first order claims. Think of all of your IBDP classes, subject classes. Those are typically science or math or English or social studies or Turkish. Your claims are about the subject matter itself. They're not about knowledge, which is weird because you're getting knowledge about those subject areas. So the knowledge exists. It's there somewhere. It's just not obvious. TOK hopes to make it obvious. So examples of first and second order claims. Here are some examples just to help you get an idea. There are an infinite number of prime numbers. This is a first order knowledge claim because it resides firmly inside the area of knowledge mathematics. It's established using the method of mathematical proof. Mathematical knowledge is certain. This, however, is a second order knowledge claim because it's about mathematical knowledge. It's not about mathematics itself, it's about knowledge within mathematics. So we establish this by examining the methods of mathematics themselves and then using the tools of TOK to come up with this question and attempt to answer it. So the next part of this slide talks about first and second order claims and asks you to put them in order. And you want to, I guess not put them in order, but to identify which is first order, which is second order. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, the answers are there. So you can pause this if you want to take a look at these further, but you can kind of get an idea of what counts as first order, what counts as second order. It's important to note that both types of knowledge claims might be found in Theory of Knowledge class. The first type will feature in examples offered in the essay and the presentation that you create and present, illustrating the manner in which areas of knowledge go about the business of producing knowledge. The second type will constitute the core of any piece of TOK analysis. So it's kind of like this. I give you a second order claim, and then I examine it with a bunch of first order claim facts and information. So now that we've briefly covered knowledge claims, let's apply that understanding to first and second order questions. What is a knowledge question? Knowledge questions are central to TOK. Understanding what a knowledge question is and how to arrive at knowledge questions based on real life situations is central, is key to doing well in this course, and really to being able to understand the underlying assumptions and point of anything that you're studying in other classes, in university, in life beyond school. Keep in mind, knowledge questions are rigorous inquiry questions about knowledge itself. How are knowledge questions made? Like the difference between first and second order claims, knowledge questions, or KQs are second order questions. So we look at a real life situation, which we've been collecting and writing up and keeping track of on our ManageBack journals. And what we want to be able to do is go back and look at those situations and think about what assumptions about knowledge are made within those situations. So we want to go from vocabulary specific to that area of knowledge within that particular situation, and we want to tease out or extract a question about knowledge in general. Keep in mind that KQs are about knowledge, not about other subjects. That's what makes them challenging to create, because we take another subject and we tease out or extract a question about knowledge related to that subject. So extracting KQs from first order questions. When considering the support and evidence for a specific knowledge claim, for example, this painting is by Van Gogh, we usually consider specific claim-centered questions. For example, is the color palette like the one Van Gogh used, or how is the paint applied to the canvas? Questions like this to try and prove that knowledge claim. These specific questions can give rise to more general questions regarding how knowledge is acquired. So you might think to yourself, what role do reason and perception play in identifying a work of visual art? So we can see that maybe we started with a specific question about a painting and who it's by and whether or not it's by a specific painter, but then we were able to tease out a more general or question about knowledge. And you might also see that ways of knowing, like reason and perception, get brought up in this area of knowledge question about the arts. Knowledge questions begin in real life situations. So you want to find a magazine article or a journal article or a study or a debate or some actual thing that you could research. As individuals reflect on the ideas engendered in this fashion, various ways of framing some of the questions involved come to mind. Knowledge questions emerge as individuals move in their thinking from specific subject and claim-centered questions to more general questions about knowledge itself and how knowledge is acquired. So how do we come about knowledge of whatever specific thing it is that we're considering within real life? So the three elements of knowledge questions. When you're formulating a knowledge question, you want to make sure that it's about knowledge. You want to make sure that it's an open question. That means it doesn't have a direct yes or no or specific answer. And you want to make it general about knowledge so that it's applicable to more than one situation. Some techniques for extracting knowledge questions from real life situations. So I talked earlier about starting with a first order claim. So the first order claim method starts with beginning with a first order claim about your real life situation, then revising that first order claim to be a second order claim about knowledge so that you're moving away from that specific situation but you're thinking about some of the general underlying ideas about knowledge that are implied by that situation, and then you rephrase that second order claim into a question. Alternately, you might use the question revision method. You start with a statement about your real life situation. You craft a description of the situation or the subject. This is not a knowledge question. You write a narrow question implicitly about knowledge. This would count as a poor knowledge question, but it's really clearly about knowledge, or implicitly about knowledge, sorry. Then you revise that question to be an open-ended question about knowledge only in the context of that real-life situation. And then finally, you revise that to be an open-ended question that is this time explicitly about knowledge in general, being stated in terms of TOK using TOK vocabulary and concepts. So either method that you use, and these are only two, by the way, of infinite methods of extracting knowledge questions from real-life situations, the bottom line is, no matter what method you use, you go from specific to general. This is an exercise in inductive reasoning. So here's some practice with knowledge question revision technique, where you're asked to put the following in order from real-life situation to good knowledge question. Again, you can see the answers at the bottom, but if you try this, pause the film here and get an idea of maybe how you move from really specific to really general and about, like specific about a situation and then general and about knowledge. So here are some sample knowledge questions just to give you an idea. To what extent do we need art technique or art history training in order to appreciate an artwork? You might notice that this question doesn't have the word knowing or knowledge in it, but it is about how we create the knowledge of what art appreciation is. What is the relationship between hands-on experimental work and theory in natural sciences? What do we mean by elegance in mathematical proof? How should we approach academic history when under the auspices of a totalitarian regime? And what is the role of intention in making ethical decisions? I really like that all of these questions don't rely on the word knowledge. That's not to say that using or writing a knowledge question with the word knowledge is bad. It's fine, but you can also talk about knowledge in a variety of other ways. So take a look at this list. What kinds of vocabulary seem to be used in a typical knowledge question? It's useful to think about that as you get started in writing your own. So I think it helps to have some ideas about how to start the question, how to phrase the question. A good knowledge question might start with the phrase, to what extent, how far, how many models, what role does, under what circumstances, how can we know? These are not the only ways to begin a knowledge question, but it often helps to have an idea of how to begin when you are new to the concept of thinking about and questioning knowledge. I do have to caution you that many TOK students, especially when they first start out in trying to extract and draft knowledge questions, they tend to overuse the phrase, to what extent. You can start there, but don't end there. Don't let that first phrase, to what extent, be your crutch. And not all knowledge questions start with that phrase. In fact, there are plenty of questions that are first order questions that can start with these phrases. The key is making sure your question is about knowledge and not about the subject itself. So how do we know if a knowledge question is good? If you think back to a few slides earlier, I walked you through the question model where it talked about poor knowledge question, intermediate, and good. So a good knowledge question is open-ended. That means it admits more than one possible answer. It's explicitly about knowledge in itself and is not subject-specific. So it comes from a specific subject. Think about it this way. A knowledge question is inspired by a specific moment or subject or situation, but the question itself is not dependent on that situation. It is general. It is couched in terms of TOK vocabulary and concepts. It is precise in terms of the relationships between TOK concepts. Here are a couple of tips. Formulating a good KQ tends to be an ongoing process. That means you're going to write something and revise it several times. A good knowledge question rarely arises as soon as you start thinking about your specific real life situation. I often say to my students, you don't find knowledge questions, you grow them. Also, often what we might term a poor knowledge question is just a starting point, a first suggestion that can then be reflected on, refined, revised, and developed until we create a truly useful analytical question that can be applied to a range of real life situations. So, again, we're talking about identifying a real life situation that is a rich source of thinking about knowledge, that inspires us to think about knowledge in general in a new or provocative or different way. And then we ask a question about knowledge based on that inspiration that we can attempt to answer using our original real life situation and other real life situations that we come across. So that's your introduction to knowledge questions, beginning with knowledge claims, moving on to knowledge questions, and ultimately extracting general good questions about knowledge from specific real life situations.